Here we go.
Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. In Moses' parting song to the Jewish people, he mentions faith, emuna, in two different ways, both of which don't refer to man's faith in God. We take the opportunity to explore the meaning of faith in the Torah and later rabbinic thought. So gather round, you faithful Madlik listeners, and join us for God Believes. Well, I got to say, anyone who is here after being in synagogue all day in Yom Kippur, you must be Jewish addicts or Torah addicts, because here we are again. We just can't get enough, and I thank you all for coming. Last week I quoted a beautiful comment that I got, and then I also said that there was the ticket lady at my synagogue who, when I wanted to change my seating time, said, "No problem, I listen to Madlik every Friday." So this week when I showed up to synagogue and I saw the same lady, she goes, "I'm the ticket lady. I have a name, and my name is Susan." So Susan, I want to thank you. Thank you for letting me into synagogue. Thank you for listening to Madlik, for being one of our faithful. We also got a comment from another listener, and he said that the study of Torah is expanded by commentaries, indeed a remarkable yet nuanced journey. Geoffrey Stern, in collaboration with Rabbi Adam Mintz, each week focuses on thoughtful interpretation of the current week's Parsha, and thereby bring exciting understanding and relevance to the biblical verse. He goes on, but I won't bore you with the details. It is wonderful when we listen and we hear from our listeners, because there's nothing worse than speaking into a vacuum, and there's nothing better than teaching Torah and studying Torah with friends and families. So thank you all for being here. Rabbi, you mentioned that next week on Shabbat, we're actually not going to be reading the Parsha. We're ending the Torah, but it's not in the Sabbath cycle. Is that right?
Right. So let me just explain that, since this is actually our last Thursday night of the cycle, even though there is one more Parsha left. So next Shabbat are the intermediate days of Sukkot, called Chol HaMoed. And on Chol HaMoed, there's a special Torah reading that relates to Chol HaMoed, to Sukkot. And the Torah we finish on Simchas Torah. That's the tradition. A week from Tuesday, we finish the Torah. So therefore, it's an interesting thing. The end of the Torah is the only portion that's actually read on a day that's not Shabbat. So actually, today we're talking about faith. Maybe we can think a little bit about the fact that this is really where we're going to end the Torah and the story of Moshe's life.
And if faith means anything at Madlik, it means that we don't have all the answers. And I want to share with all of you listeners that we don't have the answers of what we're going to do next year, because for 2 years we've been talking about the Parshat HaShavua, and I think both Rabbi Adam and I kind of are on the same page that we maybe want to think about doing something differently. So if any of you have any ideas, suggestions, go to madlik.com and write a comment on any of the podcast platforms. We are open-eared to any suggestions and ideas that you have. But here we are. This is our last Madlik podcast of this cycle, and we picked a very small, trivial title. We're going to talk about faith. It's about time. 2 years. What do you say, Rabbi? Is it about time to talk about faith?
I'm ready. Fantastic. I love it.
So we are in the Parsha of Ha'azinu, and it is literally the swan song. It is a song from Moses, God through Moses to the Jewish people. And it begins in Deuteronomy 32, and we're going to read 1 through 4. And it says, Ha'azinu Hashemayim, give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the sound, the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. For the name of God I proclaim. Give glory to our God, the rock whose deeds are perfect. Yea, all God's ways are just. A faithful God, never false, true and upright indeed. And I am going to focus on the words of faithful God, El Emuna, because the word for faith, the word for belief in Judaism is emuna, and it is rarely, as we will see tonight, used in the Torah, and this is one of the primary places that it's used. And sure enough, to our surprise, it is not talking about Moses, the man of faith. It is not talking about the people of Israel, a people of faith. It is talking about El Amunah, a God of faith. And that's why I call this episode God Believes. But before I open this up to the rabbi's comments, I'm going to go down just a few more verses, because after Moses finishes talking about how God has given mankind every opportunity by giving his word as dew and as light and all of that good stuff, it gets a little critical. And at 32:20 it says, God said, I will hide my countenance from them and see how they fare in the end, for they are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. Lo emun behem, the same word, no faith, you could say, in them. So here we have in, one small chapter, which is what our Parsha ultimately is, one small song, faith is used twice, once to describe a God of faith, and the second time to describe a people with no loyalty in them. Rashi says, Lo emun behem, my training is not evident in them, for I showed them the good way, and they have deviated from it. It doesn't really smack of there are people lacking faith. There are people almost who betrayed God's trust. How do you take, at least for the purposes of these few verses, Rabbi, the words emunah and emun?
So, first of all, it's really interesting to compare these two things, because what you see is that the word faith is not, you think that faith means what we have in God. That's the one use of the word faith. And here you see that in both cases, that's not exactly what it means. So let's just take each one. El Emunah, a God we can count on. That's a very important thing. We just coming off of Yom Kippur. You need to be able to count on God. If you can't count on God, you're in big trouble. El Emunah. God is a trustworthy God. That's a very important quality. We might argue, and we can discuss this, we might argue that it's the most important quality of all. The fact that God, we can trust God, that we know that God is going to take care of us from day to day. We can trust God. But lo emun bam means they have no emuna, which means they can't be trusted. What it means that God can trust the people. They're not reliable. We have that term today too. The worst thing you'd say about someone who works for you is they're not reliable. Right? They're not reliable. That's terrible not to be reliable. And that's what he says about the people. They're not reliable. So God is reliable and the people are not reliable.
You know, we haven't done this for a while, but in modern Hebrew, an ish ne'aman is someone you can count on. It's someone you can rely on. He's reliable. And I think you kind of touched upon that in both of your explanations of the different permutations of emuna that we have in this pasuk. It says a faithful God. What your interpretation is someone, a being that we can rely on. And when it talks about the children with no uman in them, that you can't rely on them. And I think that is, that has to be the most basic interpretation, and that has to be the most straightforward reading of the text. But because we've been spending so much time in synagogue, I like I said in the pregame, once I decided on what we were going to discuss tonight, I started focusing on the prayers slightly differently. And I said, how does this word emunah appear in our prayers? And the most amazing thing is that when you wake up in the morning, even before you've washed your hands, and so therefore you cannot say God's name befurash, you can't actually say Hashem Adonai. There is an amazing prayer that every child learns in Cheder, and it's called the Modeh Ani. And it's Modeh Ani lefanecha, I give thanks to you, living and everlasting King. Chai v'kayam shehechazarta bi nishmati, that returned my soul to me. When you wake up, you're actually, the Talmud says, 1/60th of coming back to life. Bechemla, in great mercy, and then you pause and you say, Rabba emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. So here again, we have this word emunah, but it doesn't say in the sense of I am faithful, great is my belief. It is God's faith in me that we rejoice upon. And I look at that and I go back to the verses that we just read, and I see a faithful God as a God who believes in us. And I see children with no uman behem, the way Rashi says, my training is not evident. God is in a sense disappointed because he had faith, or he or she had faith in us, and we didn't come through. But certainly, Rabbi, how do you take this Rabba emunatecha, great is your faith?
I mean, it's a good question. Bechemla, Rabba means with kindness, Rabba emunatecha. Your faith in us. Isn't that really what it means? It's God's faith in us. And I think that there's a very important point that the rabbis understood. And what the rabbis understood is that faith is one of those terms that's multi-directional. If you're going to have a relationship, you have to trust one another. By the way, that's true about marriage also, right? If only one partner trusts the other one, but the other one doesn't trust the first one, you're not going to have a good marriage. The only way a marriage can work is if both trust one another. That's a very, very important point. And here you have the same thing. If we're going to have a relationship with God, it means that we have to trust one another.
I totally agree. I think you could make the argument that Rabba emunatecha could be great is my faith in you, that you revived me. I went to sleep and I believed in it. But I don't think that is the explanation. The amazing thing is, like all of our prayers, it doesn't come from nowhere. The Sanhedrin Haggadah, or whoever wrote our prayers, took them from Scripture. And believe it or not, these two words come from Eicha, Lamentations, the book that we read on the saddest day of the year. And in Lamentations chapter 3:17, it says, and this is, I'm kind of coming in the middle. If you look at the source notes and you read it from the beginning of the chapter, it is just beautiful and poetic. But it is a whole litany of things of how we are bereft. My life was bereft of peace. I forgot what happiness was. I thought my strength and hope had perished before the Lord. To recall my distress and my misery was wormwood and poison. Whenever I thought of them, I was bowed low. But this do I call to mind. Therefore I have hope. The kindness of the Lord has not ended. His mercies are not spent. They are renewed every morning. Ample is your grace. Rabbi emuna techa. The Lord is my portion. Chelke Hashem. God is my chelik. The Lord is my portion. I say with full heart. Therefore I will hope in him. Talk about hatikva. Talk about hope. Here is the prophet Jeremiah giving voice to the forlorn individual, the forlorn people of Israel, and what gives them hope is clearly not their faith in God, but the translation I wrote is ample is your grace, but the word is Rabbi emunatecha. I don't think you can other than give the interpretation that we're giving, which is great is your faith, even if it's unfounded, in us.
So that's what it is, God's trust in us. And it's exactly what you said. You know, God, it's a kind of weird idea. But the idea in Moda'ani is that every single morning God makes a decision. The decision is whether or not to give us back our life. That at night we're asleep and God decides whether or not to give us back our life. Bechemla, Rabba emunatecha. That God is ultimately trusting, he trusts us. And that's why he gives us back our life. If he didn't trust us, there'd be no reason to give us back our life. If he didn't think that we were going to be good people, it wouldn't pay to give us back our life. Rabbi emunatecha. Isn't that what it means?
I think if you're looking at the liturgy to give us an answer, the answer is when the liturgy talks about faith, it's God's faith in us. So to give you another example, the Shemona Esrei, the silent prayer, the 18 benedictions, the core of every prayer service, from the simplest mundane morning service to the Nila service. The second prayer talks about sustainer of the living with kindness, resurrector of the dead with great mercy, supporter of the fallen and healer of the sick, releaser of the imprisoned, and fulfiller of his faithfulness to those who sleep in the dust. Emunato lishenei afar. Again, it's God's faith in us. We come from a world where other religions, and I'm gonna prepare you for a question I'm gonna ask later, Rabbi, about conversion. But certainly in other religions, when you convert to Christianity, when you convert to Islam, you have to verbalize, I believe in this. I believe in Allah and Muhammad is the prophet. I believe in Jesus. And here we are encountering in the Bible, in the Torah, and in our prayers, a totally different type of faith. I think it's radical.
I think it's radical. That is really interesting. And, it's interesting, just to jump ahead to your kind of question, and that is, statements of faith. Judaism doesn't quite have statements of faith, do they? Right? We don't have for us. Now, we do have Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We do say that God is one. But that's about something else. That's about that there is no other God. It doesn't talk about what our relationship is with God. All it says is there's no other God. And just to jump ahead to your question, when somebody converts, we don't make them explain what their relationship with God is. The question we ask is, do you reject the belief in other gods? That's the key. So that's just interesting the way we see theology. We see theology as the rejection of other gods. That's what's important.
So I think that's fascinating because so many times, and again, I'm talking to the expert here. Rabbi Adam, you've done countless conversions. You're on in the JCC of Manhattan. You're on you're the head of a whole agenda to explore a conversion. And we always think of conversion in terms of, okay, a Christian comes and they want to convert, and a Muslim comes and they want to convert. And for the first time, as I'm reading these, I go, well, what happens if someone says, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, but I fell in love with this woman, or I fell in love with this man, or I fell in love with Judaism, with the rituals. We were talking about the rituals before. Do you even ask a potential convert if they believe in God? It just struck me as a curious question.
Yeah, it's very good. No. Yeah, it's very good. It's a very, very good question, and it's especially good because the answer is no. And that's just because we're worried about something else. Seems to be that the history of Judaism was actually the rejection of idolatry. Now, that goes back a long way because there's no real idolatry anymore. But when that was an issue, that was a huge issue. And that's what that's what we reflect. That's what we refer to.
I don't go on Facebook all that much, but I have one young rabbi. He was a Reform rabbi. He made Aliyah during COVID, and now he works for the Jewish Agency, named Joe Swartz. And he 2 days ago, posted a string about the question of faith. And somebody asked him, what does faith mean to him? And he found the question to be very odd. And then he started to question himself and saying, why is it odd? And so it elicited a bunch of comments. But one of the comments from Noah Millman, and he has very learned followers, says, the more I think about it, the more struck I am by the number of injunctions against faith. Faith in the wrong things. It's not just idols we aren't to have faith in, it's also people. Al tiftechu be'indivim be'even adam she'en lo teshua. That kind of thing. And that's kind of what you were just saying. It's so fascinating that on the one hand, we have this aspect of faith, which is a God who has faith in us. And then the other aspect is misdirected faith, believing in the wrong things. And that was
the wrong things. That's very interesting. That's correct. It seems to be that the history of Jewish theology is the fear of believing in the wrong thing.
Misplaced belief. So right. I really want to make sure that we don't leave any stone uncovered. I think that faith or emuna is something that is used when you need it. So there's a very famous verse in Tehillim, in Psalms, and it says, "Lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunatcha b'leilaut," to proclaim your steadfast love at daybreak, your faithfulness each night. And again, getting back to our liturgy, when we finish the Shema every day, we sign off in the morning different than we sign off in the evening. In the morning we say Emet v'Yatziv, and at night we say Emet ve'emunah. both of them have this word truth. And of course, truth is part of all this. The one aspect of emuna that comes through in all of our prayers is a simple word. It's a word called amen. When we say amen, it comes from the same root as emuna. And what we're saying is it's true, or we concur.
We believe in it.
We believe in it, but again, in this nuanced sort of belief that we're talking about. We can trust on it. We can rely on it. And the Talmud talks about, I once got onto an El Al flight, and I was sitting next to a chassid, an old chassid, and it was a cold day, and I don't have a lot of Yiddish, but I said to him, "Sehr kalt, it's very cold," and he said, "It's not as cold as Siberia." So
that's what he said.
That's what he said.
Funny.
So that was a conversation starter, and I said, "Well, were you in Siberia?" And he said yes, and he pulled out his passport, and it had his picture front and center, and up in the upper right hand corner, it had a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he pointed to that, and he said, "That's why I survived in Siberia." And Rabbi and listeners, if you know anything about me, I'm not the one to start looking at a Rebbe and to say, oh, whatever he says is right. But I said to myself, maybe in Siberia, you need a little bit of an image of somebody that you can totally believe in. So there's this concept of emuna at night, emuna in the dark times. And I think that's kind of interesting and fascinating too.
That is really interesting. I mean, that you see, that point, I wasn't thinking about that, but that point is really good. Ve'emunatcha balelot. At night, you need emuna. Emuna means that you trust. What you trust is that there's going to be a tomorrow. That requires trust because that's not based on knowledge. I don't know that there's going to be a tomorrow. So during the day, I don't need emuna because it's already light outside. But at night, I need emuna.
And we got a sense of that in Eicha, in Lamentations, which certainly rates right up there with Siberia. And the word emuna was linked to the word hope, a light at the end of the tunnel. And, in that Facebook thread, and I quote it in my Sephira notes, this Joe Schwartz says, at the end of the day, what does faith mean to me? It ultimately means that not I believe in something, that I believe it's worth it, that I believe it's that there's meaning, that it's okay. I heard one of my friends came for the break fast, and he said, "What are you going to be talking about at Madlik this week?" And I said, "Faith." Mm-hmm. And they said, "Well, how can you believe after the Holocaust?" And I quoted probably something that you may have all heard before, where they asked a believing Jew after the Holocaust, "How can you possibly believe in God after the Holocaust?" And his answer was, "How can you believe in man after the Holocaust?" And at the end of the day, what his answer means to me is that it's a combination of this sense of real faith is faith in our human predicament. It's faith in our human condition. It's a faith in our world. Maybe it is that we believe in a God who believes in us, but at the end of the day, it's not faith in, it's just faith.
Yeah, so that's also interesting. Faith in. Do you need faith in? And what you're arguing is, by definition, faith in is not the best kind of faith. Because faith needs to be even without the in. Faith just needs to be faith.
Faith that there's a better day ahead. Faith that it's worthwhile to get up in the morning. That's what Rabba emuna techa means to me. So the other things that I left in the Sephira notes is a real discussion about faith and dogma. I mean, it wasn't until Maimonides came and gave a list of 13 things that Jews have to believe in. and the first was Ani Mamin, and it's in the Siddur, that there is that God exists, and not surprising for those of you who listen to Madlik on a regular basis, there are rabbis who argue with him. He claims that one of the 613 commandments is one of them. The first one is to believe in God, and the Ramban says not at all. And of course, whether he says not at all because it's the basis of everything, because it's the assumption of anything, or whether we moderns can interpolate from that it is besides the fact, or because it cannot be commanded, who knows? But it's fascinating to know how late it was before we Jews got this sense of a dogma and things that we had to believe in. And for those of you who enjoy singing Yigdal Elohim Chai, it's really a musical version of Maimonides' 13 attributes. But again, it's fascinating to look at something so basic as faith and to wonder what it really means to us.
I just want to say that as we conclude this round of this cycle of the Torah readings, it's amazing to end on the idea of faith, because that's, it's the idea that is at the foundation of everything in the Torah, but it's something that really doesn't come up all that often. And it's interesting that now the last week that we kind of think about what faith means and, and how it applies to our lives. So thank you, Geoffrey, for choosing an amazing topic. I want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach and enjoy this week's Parsha Ha'azinu and V'zot HaBracha. And we know that when we finish the Torah, we say three words: Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek, which means let us be strong, let us be strong, let us strengthen one another. And I think, Geoffrey, what we've tried to do over the past 2 years in Clubhouse is to strengthen ourselves and to strengthen one another. And we look forward, after a little break, of coming back with new ideas for you and to continue to Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Chag Sameach. Be well.
Chag Sameach, Rabbi. I thank you for every week for joining us on this conversation. And full disclosure, today is my birthday, and I couldn't celebrate my birthday in a better way than with all of you here on Clubhouse and on our podcast. If any of you have any suggestions or ideas of what we should do in the year ahead, don't be shy. Let us know. But in the meantime, enjoy the end of the Torah, enjoy Sukkot, and we'll see you all in the year ahead. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Be well. Bye-bye.
And if anyone has any comments or suggestions, come on down. We are open.
Hey, Jeff, great presentation. Happy birthday. What I wanted to say was, having read Ha'azinu many times, although not this coming Shabbat, that I thought that the rest of lines, so the emuna word appears in line 4, and it says, El emuna ve'ein avel tzaddik v'yashar hu. And then 5 and 6, or at least 5 certainly, I thought it explains what emunah means, because it says basically a faithful God without injustice. He is righteous and upright. And then in 5, when he says shichet lo banav, etc., he says destruction is not his, it is his children's defect, you crooked and twisted generation. So it's very interesting right there. He's really explaining what it means to God to be faithful, and it further goes into like what he means when humans aren't. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most basic, straightforward explanation of faithful is reliable, consistent, more than that, elevated. It's someone who does the right thing. And God, as you say in those following verses, is the one who you can count on. He does all the right things. And then the verses very quickly go down onto, by contrast, into the children of Israel who are not so much. And so it's really interesting that the translation of faith and belief to emuna is probably misleading. Because it has nothing to do with faith or belief. It has to do with trust. And even if, there are times where it talks about the Jewish people or the Israelites are crooked, God is straight. So that's the most interesting thing. And if you do that, and if you follow that to its end, and you say, okay, so emunah does not mean faith and belief, do we have a word for faith and belief? And that also becomes kind of interesting. But there's no question that in Exodus, when Moses is at the burning bush and he says to God, it's great that you're appearing to me, but that they may believe in God. He wants to know, what will it take to have the Israelites believe in him? And then when he talks later about convincing Pharaoh and the Egyptians, he uses the word emuna. So that's where I think it gets this nuance, and only in respect to others. Only in respect, I wouldn't say necessarily to polemics, but in the sense of interaction with other people, where the word emuna becomes believing. It does have that aspect to it, but certainly in our in the verses in Deuteronomy, Devarim, that we're reading now, it's very far afield from faith in the way that we've grown up to believe. But, I made reference to Joe Schwartz and his Facebook thing. He ended up by saying, and this I find is amazing, I assume faith is the opposite of yi'ush, which is despair, giving up. Faith, I suppose, is an attitude toward all things of this world that resists the impulse towards nihilism. Sometimes it might flow from conviction, but I suppose it must. So I think that at the end of the day, whether it's being able to rely on somebody, that ultimately at the end of the day, whether you're in a concentration camp or you're in Ukraine or wherever you are, you want to know that somebody cares, that there's somebody else out there that cares about you, that hears you. And I think that at the end of the day, and that's, I think, what my takeaway was, that when I was saying it's not faith in, it's just faith, that there's something beyond you that matters. I don't know. And I think that at the end of the day, those of us who get up in the morning and just, go about our business, at the end of the day, we've got to have some sort of faith, especially in this crazy world that we live in.
Well, I had two other comments. One is the comment about radicalism was about not believing in, that you don't have to believe in God. It was in the context of Christianity and Islam, but they came much later. So actually, it's radical because of what came before it.
Well, we don't rehearse, and I know that the rabbi does many conversions, and I was fascinated by the question that literally just popped into my head.
That was fabulous.
We all assume everybody is converting from something, but what happens if somebody shows up and say, literally, I'm not a believer, I'm not a religious person, but I just love Shabbat, and I love the community, and I love all that. And it was fascinating. And I kind of knew the answer, but it was fascinating to hear him say it, because you never hear of a rabbi who's involved with that kind of thing who says, well, do you believe in this? And do you believe in that? It's, are you, on the one hand, what are you not going to do? Can you give up your other faith options? But more importantly, do you embrace Jewish tradition and Jewish action and ritual? And do you want to join the community? And it was fascinating to hear him say that, but I enjoyed asking the question.
Yeah, I remembered my last comment. I agree with everything you said. My last comment was, I think the rabbi said at one point, well, idolatry doesn't really exist anymore, or something to that effect. And he may be right in the traditional sense if you're looking for a traditional opinion, but there are many others who say, for people who don't believe in God, which we're not saying is a requirement anyway, that if they don't, they generally fill it with some other belief, whether it's capitalism, communism, some ism in their lives that really, motivates them. But in a way, these are all false idols, no?
Look, I'm a big believer in why we start Kol Nidre by saying any vows that I have are neutralized. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a lot about Judaism who is saying we don't know what we can say yes to, but we know what we need to say no to. We need to clean the slate. We need to clean our mind, to open ourselves up. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of what faith is. It's not misplaced faith more than what you believe in, and opening oneself up. Anyway, it's a fascinating discussion, and especially we can say, these discussions only came up after the rise of Christianity and Islam. But again, that gives us a wonderful mirror to look at our own religion and to say,
Absolutely.
well, how different is it? So anyway, that's what we need to celebrate. So thank you. And if you have any ideas of what we want to do in the year ahead, let me know.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.